Stories bring lessons, laughter, unforgettable experiences, and memories that far outlive the storytellers themselves. Great stories happen to those who can tell them. This is the Jackin Around podcast, hosted by two-time Academy of Country Music Award winner and master storyteller Jack Ingram. And now to introduce today's guest, here is podcast producer Matt Vivato.
Thank you, Rowdy Yates. Welcome to episode number 5, presented by Mile Zero Music Fest. Catch Jack, Lucinda Williams, Black Smoke Cherry, Randy Rogers, Pat Green, plus dozens of others in Key West, Florida from April 27th through May 1st. For more info, visit milezerofest.com. Today, Jack welcomes music industry professional and touring extraordinaire Drew Brown. Drew's career spans over 4 decades, not only includes touring with Jack as his tour manager from 2005 to 2012, but also spent some time on the road with Miranda Lambert, to most recently as Jason Aldean's production manager from 2015 to 2020. Part 1 opens with Drew visiting with Jack about opening the Blue Light Live in Lubbock, Texas in the early 2000s, to sharing war stories of being on the road with Jack and his band for 6 years. Part 2 premieres Wednesday, April the 7th, and picks up where Part 1 left off. And that's Drew visiting with Jack about being on stage with Jason Aldean during the mass shooting in Las Vegas. Before we begin, some quick housekeeping notes. Provided below in the description is Drew and Jack's bios, links to listen on your favorite audio platform, to connect on social media, and to visit the website located at jackinaroundpodcast.com. Last but not least, help us spread the word and share this podcast with your friends. Like and hit that subscribe button. So here is episode number 5. Enjoy.
Jacking Off with Jack Ingram, sponsored by Broken Toe Productions. I mean, what?
Jacking Off with Jack
Jacking
Ingram.
Off with Jack Ingram. Broken Toe Productions. Toe, what do we do here?
You rolling, man? Oh, we're rolling.
Oh, shit.
It's really called Jackin' Around, but
Sorry.
with Drew here, we can call it Jackin' Off if you'd like.
No. I've had enough of years of that. Thank
Welcome
you.
to Jackin' Around. This is my buddy Drew Brown, tour manager, production manager extraordinaire, and we know he knows where all the bodies are buried, and he killed some of them.
Yep.
We were on the road for how long?
I think you and I did almost 6 years, if not a full 6 years.
Where'd we meet?
First time was I booked you at the Blue Light.
That's right.
I would say I started that venue in 99, and you would have probably come up 2000, 2001.
Is that the first time I ever played there?
Yep.
Because I used to play
Let's get this shit right.
the box Wild West or whatever it was called.
No, back then it would have been, yes, the same people own it, but it was a midnight rodeo.
Oh, wow.
And so then that later became the Wild West when they had moved, but it was the one.
Oh,
yeah.
It wasn't
took
the
a
one.
while.
It was the one on the highway.
Yeah. But it wasn't the one that you had done later on that was down by the Blue Light. It was across town.
That's what. Yeah,
You
that's
remember?
Right. That's right.
So, but yeah. So that would have. I'm going to guess around 2000, 2001. I'm trying to think of people in your band. I think Jens would have been there. So
Yep.
the tall German. I don't think Jordan was there with you because I would have remembered him.
That would have been Romy,
Probably.
Jeremy Elliott.
So let's go through that pedigree because I was thinking about that today with Wes. So Elliot, then Joel, then me, then Kevin. Oh, yep, scratch that. Elliot, then Joel, then Jordan, then me,
That's right.
then Kevin.
That's right.
So before that would have been Tommy.
Well, Tommy was an interim guy
Right.
when Electric came out.
So who was before that?
So it would have been Joel at the Blue Light.
Yeah, probably might have been Joel. Anyway, doesn't matter. I don't remember the tour manager. I just remember you being an asshole. So,
I was.
Well, come on, buddy. You had the edge. You've never lost it. You know, little swagger.
Well, probably because you only gave us towels and a 6-pack
Come
of
on, buddy.
Coors.
You're playing in Texas, you know? It's a Texas rider. Here, it's what would we always say? Case of Queso. It's the Case of Queso rider. Case of water, case of beer. There you go.
The one toe never read.
Oh, yeah. Pfft. Never.
Toe wrote it.
Toe wouldn't mark it out with a pen. He would just, with his cigarette burned out because he just burning 9 cigarettes at once going. Oh.
That's hilarious.
Broken.
So when did you, so I'm trying to remember when you started tour managing me.
All right. So, I mean, if you want to go to pedigree, so let's start in Lubbock because that's pretty much kind of how I started.
Yeah.
So, 96, I started working at the original Stubbs in Lubbock as a dishwasher. And so, and it's sad to say this, but I wanted to work at an airport for some reason, but they drug tested. And at the time, I probably couldn't have peed clean at that time.
Right.
So
at that time.
And so I was hired as a dishwasher. That lasted about a week. And they're like, hey, this kid knows something. Here, start being a cook. So I started slicing barbecue and doing that. And then that, within probably 3 weeks, turned into here, run the kitchen, start running tables, doing this. And then that turned in a month later of bartending. And that turned into just running the whole ship. So I did that for probably, that would have, let's just say 97, because I think that's when I started. That would have been about 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had a big New Year's Eve celebration. And next day, it was that night. After we locked up and cleaned, the guy who owned that place, there was a guy named Harold Akins and a guy named Tom Frazier and a lady named Susan. Mm-hmm. And Susan was one of these, just, you'd have loved her, just brash lady. Like she'd be sitting there eating a bowl of coleslaw, smoking a cigarette at the same time. Anyway, so we got cleaned up that night after New Year's Eve, locked the door, and we were always having our ceremonial drink.
Mm-hmm.
And Tom said, that's it. We're locking the door. We're done.
Really?
We wanted one more night just to make enough money to pay the comptroller taxes or whatever for the year, but we're done. I was like, were you selling it? It's like, no, we're done. We just can't afford to do this anymore. I'm like, shit. So at that time, there was Tom's Daiquiri was a little bitty place on Buddy Holly Avenue, and Tom would come over and have lunch with us, and he's telling us that he's starting a new venue. He doesn't know what it's come. So, I got so drunk that night at Stubbs at that New Year's after that I passed out, and I slept in one of the booths there.
Right.
And Harold, the old man, and he's also a mentor. He passed out another one, and then Tom and Susan lived upstairs at Stubbs. And so that next morning I get up and we're just cooking around and cleaning stuff up and kind of just moping, licking our wounds. And McDonald comes knocking on the door and saying, hey, I hear you are going to sell this place. You want to sell some of your equipment. And I was like, well, let's go see what you got running over here. And he was in mid-construction of this place. And he was wanting to open up this new little bar called the Blue Light that had this little light up top. That's why they called it the Blue Light. And he goes, I'm going to, top 40 country dance and things, so he could come down and, polish buckles. So I started working for him doing that. And I said, you know what? There's a lot of this music that I found out through Stubbs, and there's some great acts. And, bands like, at the time, there was a band called Coup de Gras, who later became Cooter Gras.
Right.
Matt Martindale, obviously.
These guys from Amarillo.
Mm-hmm. And there was this, one of the cats that his very first gig ever, 21st birthday, this little frat boy from the Sigma Chi named Wade Bowen. And I was the bartender that night at his 21st. I remember he got so drunk.
Imagine that.
Well, the microphone was teetering and he was teetering, and I ended up putting a 5-gallon bucket right in front of the stage because I knew, when you got that look, it's like, oh, this kid's about to puke. I don't know if he did or not. And they were terrible. And, he'll
West 84.
Yeah. And they weren't even Wade Bowen yet. It was just West 84. So, but they packed the house, obviously. So, we started the Blue Light, opened the doors, and that was the first, let's say, month or so. That's what he was doing, was all DJ music. And then he wanted to have this one band a month.
Yeah.
And they were terrible. So we made it through the first month. It's like, man, let me have a shot at this and start pulling some of these other bands in. So I did, and it went like gangbusters. And then fast forward, and the progression of that, and that's honestly how I met Mr. Pivito over here because it would have been about 2000 because I think, isn't that right, Toe?
2001.
Yeah. So we opened the doors of the Blue Light April 1st of 1999 because I remember just April Fool's. Nope, that's a lie. St. Patrick's Day of 1999 because I remember we had green beers the first night. So let's say progress that year, there were bands like Cross Canadian Ragweed that, was like one of the very first venues in Texas that those guys were playing. And I had a friend, our friend, Arcadio Rivera, up at the Golden Light. And he and I palled up and we started collaborating on bands. And he goes, well, I got these little cats from Oklahoma. I was like, well, I got these little cats from here. And we started trading off and running that little route up there. And, then that progressed into the Jason Bolins, the Stonies. And like that was kind of that little inlet from Texas, from Oklahoma. But then I was filtering up bands like Reckless Kellys from Austin and, the Jack Ingrams of the world and, whatnots. And yeah, that's kind of how the Blue Light got done. So that blew up. We were doing, in the bar business, we were doing 4 nights, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, packed.
Really?
Packed. And live music every night of that. And we would close the doors on Sundays and Mondays.
Was Pat playing there?
Pat, he was, this was way before the wave on wavy kind of days, but he was smashing it. He wasn't selling out the Astrodome 9 times in a row kind of Pat, but he was making it. And the other one that was behind him a little bit was Corey Morrow. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I want to say Corey might have went to Tech.
Corey went to Tech?
Because
so did Pat.
Yeah, I know Pat did, obviously, but I think Corey did, right?
Well, you went over to the Blue Light.
Yeah.
Started booking bands there for a couple years.
Oh, yeah, 99. And then we opened Blue Light in Amarillo.
Yeah.
And then I moved to Fort Worth because my best friend and college roommate, a guy named Rex, had bought a club called the Horseman. And so at that one time, I was booking all 3 of those rooms and then doing, not only booking the one in Fort Worth, but also doing production there as well. And how I got into the audio side of things and the production side of things was back in the Blue Light Lubbock days. I gave the sound guy $125 a night in a bar tab, and the guy would just get fucking hammered, bottle of Jack Daniels and things. And I got tired of putting up with him. Yeah. So I got pissed off. And as you know, I'm fairly calm, but if I get hostility, I'll send it back big time.
Oh, yeah.
And I did that night and told him to fuck off. And
we could talk about that later.
I'll figure this. Yeah. So it's like, I'll figure this out. So I started, making the things and would get in there and, okay, this is how this works. And I got decent at it. And Tom McDonald, the owner of the Blue Light, said, man, you're getting pretty good at this. And I was still going to Texas Tech at the time. And he goes, if you can keep your grades up at Tech, run my entire operation, book all the bands, bartend, manage the club, I'll send you out to South Plains to audio school. He said, to know what you're doing. So I'm like, cool. So I did. So I was going 3 days a week, if not 4 days a week out there, like in between.
Did you finish a thing out there?
I did the audio sound reinforcement class out there.
You did?
Mm-hmm. That's where, and it was more of a, and this is, analog, of course, digital didn't exist. And it was more kind of the knowledge of what am I physically doing when I'm doing this?
Right.
Because
the funny part is that you learning the way you did before you went out to that school, Seamus, Sean Bacon.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
We used to talk about that. He's like, man, these guys come out of this school and they know how to do arena shows. They know how to do $1 million sound systems, but they don't know jack shit about give them a couple tin cans and a sports bar and see what they can do.
Yep.
So that's probably why you always had your edge on it.
1,000%. Like, the full cells and those things, they're fantastic and they're a great education, but it's not an education. It's not like the School of Hard Knocks, that old term. But as our friend Gary Ozer says, it's the rock and roll university. Just figure it out. And we kind of had to,
Yeah, like what do you do when your band's supposed to go on? You got a packed house and the PA bus. How you make noise? Figuring that shit out.
And and I think that mentality, and this is sadly, it's kind of a dying generation in that roadie style of things. And this is why, in my opinion, like we were talking about Hag earlier, and his old tour manager, Frank, I was asking him one time, I was like, how did y'all do it back in the day? You know, the old Johnny Cash years and all that stuff, you know, no, way before obviously any cell phones, any mobile, anything. And he said, we just did it. He said there would always be a bucket of quarters, and we would stop for fuel. He'd run inside and just start pumping quarters in a payphone. Well, we're probably 100 miles out, but everything ready to go. But you didn't advance any PA. You showed up and you figured that shit out. Yeah. And like you didn't hit a dry cleaner because you were only in town for a day. And it's like the same suit that they've been playing in for 3 weeks, just stagnant. And I mean, I've been on a bus with you long enough. The smells were bad enough. Remember that? Oh, your coin, what was it? Feet and butthole? That's you. Why does every tour bus smell like feet and butthole? So anywho, you just figured it out.
Yeah. But it was like that for a long time. It didn't start really changing in our world until cell phones became real prevalent.
Agreed.
I mean, I remember driving and we'd sit on the side of the road at a gas station, and I'd be on the payphone when I was advancing my own shows way back when. Yeah. And it's like, I had a list of people I needed to call, and band get all pissed off, and Pete would go walking off somewhere to a pawn shop, and then I have to get everybody back in the van and start going. And the pile, like the dash was always filled up with rolled up old Rand McNally maps of everything where you go, and just piles of them, you know? So, anyway, we'll get back on track a little bit because you and I both can lose track pretty quick. So we'll go back to the time frame. At this time, I'm in Fort Worth. And one of the bands that I had booked was a little Americana Southern rock band called the Lost Trailers. And that's right. Fantastic. They're great guys. Well, they had just signed a deal with Universal Records, and they were, headed to stardom. Oh, they were with the Republic. Yep. Out of New York. Yep. They were trying to do a country thing out of New York. Well, no. This is way before their country career, if you want to call that a career. They were a really badass and like Americana Southern rock band. Right. There's an album called Welcome to the Woods. Mm-hmm. And this is, ironically, that we're talking about this. What was that front man's name? Stokes Nielsen. Honestly, this is crazy. He literally called me a month ago and said there's a filmmaker out in California doing a documentary film on the making of Welcome to the Woods and that album. And the premise behind this is the Texas years. And I was the first venue that had ever booked them in America. Now, no, it was me and a guy from New York that had played. But how they got their start was they were going to Vanderbilt, and Stokes was running around and ran into Mickey Raphael, as you know, the harmonica player for Willie, and recognized him and gave a little demo of like, hey, these are my buddies and we got this. Well, I don't know if they reached back out or how it happened, but Mickey had said, why don't you come down and play the Picnic? Oh, that's cool. And so that was technically their first booked gig. Well, I don't think it paid anything, and they were probably playing at 9:00 before the doors even opened, but they needed another kind of piggyback thing. Right. Well, Stokes had gone to an agent there in Nashville, friend of his, and said, well, I need some venues in Texas to play, and I don't know any of these things. Who do I call? And the first number he got was, here, there's this guy named Drew Brown. He's got this place out in Lubbock. No kidding. And he called me, sent me a little demo thing. So that's how you got out on the road? And I booked him. Well, yeah. But it was 5 years later. And so I jumped in a van with them and did a whole year. And then, as you know, how tour support works on those record deals, record label dropped them, cut all the funding, and, I went on. So I came back and I went on the road with a guy named Wade. So I started working for Wade Bowen. And then my friend Jordan Powell, who we talked about being your tour manager, was still on the road with you. Yeah. And I think I filled in for like a merchandise guy one weekend. Right. And then I think another time I filled in for your sound guy. What was the guy that had the little short stubby guy from Houston, the punk rock guy? He's gonna talk like this.
Here's the audio dude and Ballhead is like, hey man, what's going on? Like he would have never like mixing Jack Ingram in front of the house.
Is
but
he
he's
the
just
one with the
hardcore
fake
punk.
leg?
Yes.
And I never even knew it until one day I saw his leg laying around the van. I was like, what the fuck?
Yeah. It's like he'd gotten,
whose leg is this?
He gotten, I can't remember. It's a great guy. Well, he had gotten sick. So I went out and Jordan's like, well, you do sound, don't you? It's like, yeah, man. Yeah. So I filled in for that. And you're like that. He's like, hey man, where you living? I was like, Fort Worth. And he's like, well, you called me. He's like, hey man, let me get your number. And so you called me and it's like, why don't you come over and have lunch with me? And we went to Dallas at Herrera's. And dude, that place is fucking closed.
I know.
Anyway.
I used to go there for lunch.
Oh, dude, that was
my
staple.
business lunch.
Oh, it was. And I can remember what you ate. You always like that pile of like taco meat things.
Taco meat and
the beans. And then there was, no, wasn't the rice? Was it eggs or something?
Eggs.
Yeah. Scrambled eggs.
Yeah.
I'll never
eggs
forget
with cheese.
that. It's wild that I remember what you ate
Taco
the
meat
first time.
and refried beef.
Probably because you ate that every single time you went there. So anyway, you and I had lunch and you're like, so you know how to run sound and you know, you do this tour things? I'm like, yeah.
It was that was about the same time Miranda started doing well. And they were stealing him.
So let's slow down a little bit because I went out with you as your sound guy. That's what it was. Jordan was still tour managing. So we did a bunch of runs, one of the first ones being Mexico down at that Jaime's Club at Acuna. Dude. And I jumped in a van. It would have been Yen's. Robert Kearns we picked up at South by Southwest, and Robert was on one of those drunk benders and still intoxicated.
I remember.
And he passed out in that front lounge, and you had all those coats in the back and clothes. And this is my first time, with you guys in a van. Y'all dumped all of the clothes, a stack like that, on top of Robert. And he passed out drunk, rolled the windows up, and got a bunch of green cigars and just started firing them out.
We turned the heater on.
Yes, heater on, full blast.
It was spring. It was in the springtime.
Yeah.
And so we're blowing smoke on Robert. I remember he got so pissed. Real funny,
But then let's progress on down how we got across the border, because Yen somehow was driving, and we get through the U.S. side going into the Mexico side, and they pull up to the thing in the Mexico side's like, blah blah blah, the toll. Yen just turns and goes, no, thank you. And drives right through with dudes like machine guns. You don't remember that?
I do remember that.
So that night, they were looking for him. Like it was legit looking for him. And they had to smuggle him in a cab on the way back to get across the border. And then we drove the van.
Among us a few other things.
I'm sure it was. I once, that was the sound guy. That was the one. I once stole a Mercedes out of remember that dude?
Oh, the guy. Yes, man.
Packed it out of my truck.
Bruce, what's his name?
Yeah.
Sound guy.
Oh, Bruce.
Talking about smuggling Porsches back.
Dude, I think Bruce and Blaine were definitely in the import-export business together.
Oh, yeah.
For a while.
That was fun. Those days in Acuna were fun.
Dude, remember the show that this was years later? Or a
Joe
couple
Ely?
years later. No, the show that you walked out in the street and got all those Mexican wrestling masks, and y'all came back and did like the last half of the show. And those, I still have those, by the way.
Oh, that's awesome.
I have all of them. They're up in a bag. I saw them in this quarantine clean out, as one does. I found them. I was like, dude, what a great memory. Yeah.
I remember one time we played a show.
But Masterson was in that by that time.
Yeah.
Yins had gone.
And we had done one with Joe Ely, and Joe grabbed us after the gig and walked us way down into Acuna, like not just where the tourists go, but we went and found some dump of a bar and sat there and while I watched Joe Ely be Joe Ely.
Oh boy.
Like king shit. It was fun, man.
Yeah, I think that was before my years.
What was his name? Oh, that guitar player he was with forever. It escapes me right now. Okay, so you started working for me in like 2000.
So Jordan. Electric? So during that time, I had turned down an offer because I had met Miranda out on the road with you because she was 19 probably at the time, and we were smuggling her into shows to come see you.
That's right.
And I befriended some of them, And I want to say that Rick, her dad, or Bev, one of them that asked, is like, well, Miranda's going to need somebody out on the road, do you think? And she was just fresh off that whatever reality show. And I was like, no. I'd said, well, man, hey, this girl named Miranda, Miranda, she's looking for somebody. And then he obviously went to work for her.
And then they called and took Jens.
I didn't remember that. I didn't know that.
He went up there when they were first putting the band together.
Okay.
And he went up there and Jensed himself out of a job. Trying to tell them, trying to act like they didn't know shit. Here's how you do it. And yelling at the bass player.
7-foot tall German.
He quickly came back knocking on my door. Hey, I got my job back.
And we did that for a little bit. We did the whole Jens and Masterson thing for just a few shows.
Yeah, it was
and then
for a
that
little
was
bit.
a train wreck.
And then, Jens had been in the band for a while, and he always was worried about. He never really understood the method to my madness about being as loose as we can, which will somehow make it tight.
It had the breathe, and honestly, you'll admit to this. You have Pete Coatney to thank you for that.
Yeah, of course.
Pete Coatney has to thank Charlie Watts because of that.
Of course.
The breathing. And that was really the first time that I had learned of that, because I was a music fan, but I didn't know anything about it. And that's really when I kind of then progressed from just audio of what's kick drum supposed to sound like, what's a guitar supposed to sound like, into like really music theory and kind of music methods and other styles. And you always had that swagger, and and Miranda will admit to this, because we've had, when I worked for her for 2 years, we've talked about that. It's just that swagger, and you learned it from a lot of places.
Oh yeah.
One of you've learned a persona mentality in a show a little bit from your friend Todd Schneider,
of course.
And I think the other side of it was this Buckus rebellion of being more anti,
Yeah, I used to think of it as like a football game or a fight.
Yeah.
I thought of shows like, anything to get your adrenaline up.
Yeah.
Especially when you're coming up, because it's like when you walk on stage and you're an opener or nobody really knows you that well yet, you have to create all the energy yourself, and you got to throw it out hard.
For sure.
First. And so you got to walk on stage and hit them first.
For sure.
And see if they hit you back.
And you used to tell the story, and that's the first time I heard it, the old James Brown Rolling Stones thing. You remember that story where they were both really big at the time, and then they somebody had to go tell Mr. Brown that he's going to open for the Rolling Stones. And he's like, the who? And so he's like, all right. And walked down and just burnt the fucking stage down, walks off, looks at Mick Jagger, says, beat that motherfucker.
That's right.
And that swagger, that's just it.
It's an energy that you can't.
Yeah. And so that said, that's where it's like, oh, it was a cool thing to be a part of. And
that's when you took over.
Yeah.
And I got 2 jobs for one pay.
3, buddy. Me? Actually 4. I became your truck driver, bus driver. Come on.
Yeah.
Production manager, tour manager.
Well, I paid you really well for one job.
Bitch. What? Really? You want to go there? Come on. I didn't know any better. So, hey, whatever. I'm here. So I guess it was enough. So thank you, Mr. Ingram.
Yeah, man, you're welcome.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Ingram.
I remember knowing what your future was going to look like when we got out on those big tours.
Yeah.
Brooks and Dunn and Paisley and all that. Because knowing what you knew about sound production from building it from scratch with Blue Light.
Sure.
And going to school. But man, it was always your ability to, even when I was pissed off or whatever with you, it was just like, man, the way you could handle it backstage was in a meet and greet.
Sure.
And how you handled people, other people, other peers, and how you knew the hierarchy of, you knew who I was as a person, but you also had an innate ability to know that there's this other thing that goes on when you step outside the bus.
Correct.
And how I wanted to manage that for my own self.
Run your business. And that's one reason you hired me. And there's been a lot of artists, even, Jason, Mr. Aldean will even tell you this. It's like, you hire good people that are going to do what the dirty things you don't want to have to do for you. But in the same thing, you just give them some trust and some room. But you and I always had a relationship that led me into a lot of my other professional relationships of, okay, the separation of when do we need to be pro here and need to keep things in protocol and do it as respect, or when can we be, jacking around?
Yeah, right.
So, there was never any kind of blurred line when it came to that. That's a very hard line, and it's still to the day.
That's what I mean. It's a natural thing for you.
A very thing for me, and I always I know when to keep it pro.
I also knew, man, when you got around all that equipment.
Oh yeah,
and all the
just
buses
absorbing
and the gear.
Yeah. And I still do it today, and it's. I'm a very visual learner, but I'm also one of those knowledge freaks that I constantly have to be learning something and just absorbing, but just so I can get my hands on it. And a lot of that I got exposed to, and I didn't know it was up. I learned things that you don't do very quickly, like the proverbial, what we refer to as the 3-finger loadout. And just to demonstrate what a 3-fingered loadout is, there's my cocktail. Let's just say that. That is a 3-fingered loadout. So don't be that guy that's out there, with a cocktail in his hand, sloshing around, 3 fingers, like pushing a case.
Right.
And once I was like, oh shit, okay, cool. And so, I never, and I still to this day am, if it's on the clock, trailers aren't locked, nothing.
Oh yeah, I remember.
Not a drink.
I remember.
And I don't know, it's that always stemmed from me. And a lot of those bigger tours kind of exposed that to me. Now, trailers locked and Katie bar the door, but we professionally became that kind of binge drinker from like, okay, bus is leaving at 2 a.m., power drink for 30 minutes, then go to sleep and wake up the next day and do it again. But yeah, those were some great years.
Those
man.
were fun tours.
Yeah,
man.
Dude. One of my favorite ones was Madison, Wisconsin. We were doing a festival and it pulled in early morning and parked kind of off in an off parking lot, waiting on the headliners' buses to come and park, right? Mm-hmm. As protocol is. Well, we'd woke up and all these other buses were pulling in, and you'd noticed all of these buses were wrapped with like sponsors like Movie Gallery and, Phil Vassar sponsored by blah, blah, blah. And I can't remember who it was that had a Exxon thing. So dude, Ingram's up at this time. It's like, oh shit. So we gaff taped an 8x10 photo on the side and then gaff taped Whataburger on the side of the bus.
That's right.
And then you're like, I'm driving. I'm going to drive the rest of it was 100 yards if that. So the bus driver let you do it. And here we go. And we parked it in, honking the horn in typical fashion. But
Phil
again,
Vassar brought to you by Pepsi.
Exactly. And so again, that's that swagger, but that's like the Brooks and Dunn camp. Loved you still to this day. Like when I see Baja or one of those guys, man, I'll blow. And another one that's, those are great years, man. Those are fun years. Gary Allen's camp.
Oh yeah.
Same way. But anybody that you toured with, they always saw that. John McBride, prime example. I get to see him a lot, in Nashville. At shows and award shows and stuff like that. And he's like, man, I love that. Man, those are the great years. Martina and I talk about that all the time.
That was fun.
Oh,
man.
dude.
Remember on Sundays? Him gambling?
Oh.
On
Sundays?
He had it down.
Wait. On Sundays? What are you talking about? Come on.
I just mean during football season.
Oh. Yeah. Yeah.
Speaking of after the buses were loaded and locked and we're rolling down the road, you used to have the craziest. I would always be afraid to wake you up because you'd come out swinging,
almost night
man.
terrors. Yeah. And it's odd because since like I have learned to live on a tour bus without having those, there's a couple of times, I've been with Jason Aldean for the last 5 years. And there was a couple of incidents like on my bus where the stage manager was like, dude, but I learned it was triggered by a few things, and I have since figured that. And one of them was eating at a certain hour and spicy, whatever. So fast forward, let's get back onto those stories. One of my favorite was the potato avalanche. Potato avalanche.
You come flying out of your bunk at 4 in the morning.
In my dream sequence, because I was driver's side, front, middle. So like there's a wall to my left. And you were right across from me on the passenger side in the middle. And in my dream sequence, this wall had opened up and this avalanche of potatoes was coming all showering down. And I rolled out and right into your curtain in your bunk, screaming and kicking. Yeah, man. There's some good ones. And remember that one?
Oh, yeah.
So Masterson, who is blind.
When it's convenient.
Oh, buddy. So I woke up and it's like, hey, what are you doing here? He thought somebody was on the bus, had snuck on the bus because we were parked somewhere. And he, hi, just freaking out all get out. But the one who figured it out was Robert Kearns, had figured out how to kind of get me back in bed always in those days. And he'd come up, hey, buddy, and shake my curtain. Hey, buddy, and kind of wake me up. And then I'd go back to bed.
So how did you go from after we split ways in 2007?
After we split ways.
Or 8?
Yeah, 2010. Yeah,
let's
say 2000. I can't.
So we were out for
about 6 years.
Wow.
So, it would have been probably 2009, I think. Was that right?
I did that throwdown tour in like 2009 or 10 with y'all.
Okay, then let's just say 2010 for sake of saying.
Yeah.
So I did that and I jumped out with, I think I might have gone out with Miranda after that.
Possibly.
For about 2 years, though, that was later on. I did a Bodine's run. That was things. I did a world tour with Ben Queller. I did a stint with the Reckless Kelly Boys, a little coast-to-coast thing that he and Mickey and the Motor Cars did. We did that. And then I did Need to Breathe. I did 2 tours, about a year with those guys, 2 tours with those guys.
And were you just putting feelers out in between?
No, man.
And all the guys you knew?
It was... I've been very fortunate in my career to never have had a resume. It was always through word of mouth. And even the Aldine gig. I mean, it was literally, I got a phone call. It wasn't me shopping around and putting in applications. And it was just kind of word of mouth. And that was another thing that and you can testify to this, is you only have one thing in this business, and that's, your record, if you will. You not only have to be super, super pro at your job and squeaky clean, and, everybody makes mistakes. And this is one of my mantras that I preach to all of my tours. And it's like, we're all going to make mistakes, but we get paid not to fuck up.
Yeah.
And what that is like, okay, make a mistake, learn from it. A fuck up is when I know better, I've made that mistake, and look what I did. I mean, fucking Pivito, come on. Hey, buddy. This thing on? So, oh shit, I forgot to press record. Sorry, Pivito.
So you've been with Aldine for how
5
long?
years.
5 years?
Yeah. And
did you start out as head of production, or what did
yeah. That was my gig.
you walked right in there?
Yeah, I was the production manager. That was my title.
So you walked into when he was doing big stadiums.
Big stadiums. Yeah, absolutely.
Baseball fields.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like, we up to 15 trucks, and, like the lowest was maybe 11, 15 tour buses. Yeah, massive.
What was your learning curve on that deal?
Man, and the reality is it's the same thing. I had done tours, obviously, like Need to Breathe was a, 3-truck tour, and, multiple things at any given level, even down it starts in a van and ends in a van kind of mentality of like, it's not that the problems and issues go away, it's just multiplied. Mm-hmm. Now, it's not multiplied to a sense of more pressure. It's just because you have departments to push it down, the protocols, right? Mm-hmm. Someone else is like, hey man, if something comes up to me and I know about it, it's an issue. Right. But if if I have to step in, then let's do it. And I always did it in a fairly calm and demeanor and like, here we go. And that's just part of that leadership.
What's else from starting in a van?
Yeah.
Learning how to get shit done.
The days, in the Aldine runs, it's, you could imagine, but I also had, in charge of ticketing scales for these stadiums, months in advance, like 8 to 9 months. I'm sitting there looking at seating charts and looking at the tour designs and doing all of those and doing all of that stuff. So so
you're managing the ramps and the
every single department. Yeah, every single department. I oversee all the truck drivers, all the bus drivers, all the logistics that it does to move that entire operation.
How's Aldine to work with,
dude? So Jace, as a professional in the touring side of things, he understands that he doesn't know all that stuff, and he puts a lot of trust. But he also, as a man, he's a fantastic man. Mm-hmm. I mean, really, hands down, one of the greatest guys I've ever been around. And he gets a different. Oh, come on, Ingram. Oh. So Jason's one of those guys that you don't hit him up with a bunch of options, a bunch of questions, a bunch of things. It's like, okay. It's like, here, you want this, you want that. You want it this way, that way. And if he tells you, I don't like it. Okay, cool. Let me figure something else out. It's so he doesn't want to, not that he can't do it, but he entrusts the people that he's hired to do. It's like, okay, I'm going to step back. I'm not going to micromanage you. Figure it out. Come back. And if I don't like it, I'll tell you again. So in that mentality, which is really kind of cool because there's a lot of other artists at that level that aren't that way. Yeah. They want to be completely involved and over things, and they're constantly changing their mind on that. And I've had, again, the luxury of working with a lot of those artists through the years of, very dynamic personality traits, but he's great with that in that sense, and super loyal to all of his guys, takes care of his guys. Mm-hmm. And what's really cool is, let's say like we're out somewhere, if Jason's flying home for the weekend or something like that, after that run, every single one of the band on the bus, or every single one of the crew members, everybody's going home.
No kidding.
So, and not only that, but let's say like we're up in New York and, we've got 13 tour buses and 15 trucks and stuff like that. If his bus is going home, all of the buses are going home.
So when did y'all go to Vegas?
October 1st, 2017.
And he's on stage and you got 9 chiefs that you're having to deal with.
Mm-hmm. And like Jake Owen was the act before him. And we're into about 6 songs. And the 7th, when she said baby, is when it started. So, yeah.
And you're up on stage.
Yeah, I'm literally behind the blow-through screen. Mm-hmm. And there's a deck that's, where you can kind of run gear where nobody sees it out of sight. And then, behind that is the trucks lined up. So I'm walking behind that, and I keep an earpiece in once, to calm the things. We all run to one channel.
Is it, you got, like, y'all are all on one channel, all the crew?
At that time, we go to a show channel. And that's all the communication. It's super quiet because if something comes across that channel, something's up, right? And, every department obviously, has their own respective channel. And if there's an issue internally, then they will roll over to that said channel, deal with it, and go back. But yeah, during the show, it's show channel.
All right.
So, the first 3 pops, pop, kind of came across, and it was like, that's weird. And then another series of pops.
You heard it.
Oh, yeah. Another series of pops. And there was some chatter came across. Stage manager comes to me and says, hey, man, are there some fireworks that we don't, going on that we don't know about? And I'm negative. And then one of the other guys chimes in, and at this point, I'm kind of unpinning to hear like, what's going on? And one of the guys like, no, it's just fireworks. And then that's when a third burst and it came across the stage. And I heard it. Tink, tink, tink.
It's hitting.
Oh yeah, it came across the stage. The third round came across the front of the stage. Like tink, tink, tink. Like I could hear it coming through. It went kind of that stage left behind the video wall. So I could hear it hitting the truss and going pop, pop, pop. And that's by the second burst, Jason knew something was up because he was kind of turning, looking, and his security guy was over there, and the security guy had kind of stepped up behind where his position was. And then that third round, when it started thanks, I hit the code if I could dump it. Then it was kind of a barrage. It's like, okay. Then that was when that chatter is like, okay. Then by the second round, it's like I knew something was up. And
What
that would have been
goes
the
on
third burst.
in your head? Like when you
When I
realize that
heard
there's an issue.
when I heard it hitting, well, it needs to be said the entire time we had no idea where it was coming from. We just knew it was that way.
Mm-hmm. Did you know by sound or did you know by?
Oh, well, yeah, sure, it's
Yeah.
that way.
Yeah.
And we had no idea it was from an elevated. But I didn't know it was from an elevated position until 20 minutes later in the mass chaos. And I'll tell you the story, and this will make a lot more sense. You know what? Let's take a little break real quick.
All right.
Because it's worth, you need to hear the story, and it'll make a lot more sense, and you'll understand why I can't discuss a few things.
Well, you don't have to discuss whatever you don't want to.
No. You need to hear the story just to kind of get the mentality. So I don't want to be vague here, and I don't want to dodge any of these questions because it's important to put it out there. But there's also the heaviness of this, not on me, not on everything else. It's like there were so many tragedies that happened that night. You know, 58 people died that night, and 2 have since died. I think one died in 2019 and another one in 2020. So that's 60. And 890 wounded. 890, buddy. So
How many of them did you personally know that got wounded?
buddy,
Weren't there people in the crews? And
man, look, I was the only one shot in my crew, and I got hit in the back. For the most part, backstage, there wasn't really anyone that, close. Not that makes it any better.
no, of course not.
Um,
Where did you get hit?
in the back, right there. I'll let you feel it. It's still in there. It's a fragment. It's working its way out.
It'll get there,
Yeah.
like all of it.
Yeah, that'll just get more back fat, and it'll just keep running back in there.
Sport eating.
Exactly. So, but it's a lot. So,
Like I said,
let's
you go to
take-
therapy for it?
Yeah, and we'll get to that too. So, I don't know, hit pause or something just for a little bit. And it's not that I need to get in any kind of space with it. It's just, I think for you need to be informed to where you know where to kind of lead the questions, because I can very easily talk about this with you.
Yeah.
And I can very easily keep going into these things, but it will fulfill a lot of like, now I get it. Let's go take a bio break.
This interview's over, sir.
Stepping out. Read my contract.
Show's over.
No craft service around.
Dog.